Welcome to the Retire with Peace podcast, the podcast where we help you create a fulfilling and stress-free retirement. Each week, we bring you expert advice, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you plan and live your best retirement life. Whether you're nearing retirement or already enjoying your golden years, this podcast is here to support you every step of the way. Let's embark on this journey together and discover how to retire with peace.
Welcome back to the Retire with Peace podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dave Zegel. Today, let's talk about tax credits for charitable donations. More specifically, we're going to reference things that are in the state of Missouri. I know not everybody listening is in Missouri, but a lot of our listeners are. And I think it's helpful to provide the details on the state of Missouri because other states will have similar programs that are worth looking into for tax credits, especially if you do a lot of charitable donations. Please don't stop giving to some other charity just because they don't have these tax credits, but keep this in mind in case you are looking for other places to donate. This is an opportunity to do so in addition to where you were also donating. In addition to that, make these donations and receive tax credits back from the state. The best way to describe this is a lot of people, when they hear this, they think, oh, we're going to get an extra deduction. Close. These are not deductions. These are dollar for dollar credits back to you. So it's not a deductions where you take your income, you have the deductions that subtract from that, and then you calculate your tax. What we're talking about is you have your income, you have your deductions, you calculate your tax, and then after that, you're getting credits back on the dollars of taxes that you owe. Some of them have 50% credits. Some of them have 75% credits. One of them has 100% credit. And we'll talk about all of those examples. But these are ways that you can get the state to essentially pay for half of the donation or more, sometimes 100% of the donation, if you plan these things properly. So let's go through them. There's 5 different categories we're going to cover, and most of these I'll have some examples in there of different organizations that you can donate to. And we're doing this towards the end of the year, the last quarter of the year, in terms of when we are recording this, and we'll be publishing this. That way, as you're getting to your tax planning for this year, and even years beyond this, but certainly even for this year, if you're looking for additional places to donate, these are some good options, not only good options in terms of where to donate, but extra good options in terms of where could you get the state to pay a substantial portion of the donation. So let's jump right in. Let's start with the 50% and then work our way up to the 100%. The first one is a food pantry tax credit. So think of food pantries in the area. I know not too far from where we are here in West County in St. Louis, there's one called Circle of Concern. There's also ones, they're all over the city, but there's some up in North County, in the city of St. Louis, South County. They're all over the place. And certainly as you get into other parts of Missouri, there's tons of different food banks. So you can make these donations to the food banks. And obviously the food banks are giving food to those in need. And what happens there is the state gives you a 50% tax credit. Now that there's a limit. In this case, there's a 50% of your donation up to a $2,500 tax credit per taxpayer. So if you're a married couple, you can get up to a $5,000 tax credit. You'd have to donate $10,000 to do so, but you can get 50% up to $2,500 per person for this donation. So if you were to do it in dollars, you get a $500 tax credit on your tax return for the state of Missouri. Nothing of this that we're talking about is federal. At the federal level, it's still just a charitable deduction like any other. And there's some new rules on charitable deductions this year, which we covered in our episode on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So you can go back and review that piece on the federal level. This is purely on the state level, is where you get the credit for the taxes. So food pantry is 50% of what you're donating, up to $2,500 of a tax credit per person. On that second one is a diaper bank. So very similar. you'll get 50% tax credit for your donation. In St. Louis specifically, it's a St. Louis area diaper bank. Again, pretty straightforward. You're donating some money for those that need diapers. And surprisingly, there's a lot of people that do. So that also gives you a 50% tax credit. The cap on that is substantially higher. The cap on that is $50,000 per year. So donate $100,000, you can get $50,000 of a Missouri tax credit. Now, I'll pause for a second because that's a relatively large dollar amount. It's important to understand that the tax credit is only going to offset your tax on the tax return. So you're not going to get extra back. Meaning if you have $2,000, so if you calculate from your income to your deductions, calculate your taxes, let's say you owe $2,000 of tax on your tax return, just as an example. If you do any of these donations and get a tax credit, they're not going to give you more than $2,000. So the best you can do is reduce this down to zero. They're not going to donate money and get extra back. So keep that in mind when we're talking about the size of the tax credit that you're looking for. Is it can only go up to the amount of tax that you actually owe on the state tax return. It's going to reduce that down to zero, but no more. Now, in a lot of cases, you can carry this forward to a following year. We're not going to go through all those different rules for each of these items, but just keep that in mind. Don't go crazy thinking, oh, the state's going to write me a check. No, they're just going to reduce the amount of tax you owe down to zero at best. So on to the third one. We've talked about two that were 50% tax credits, and those were the food pantries and diaper banks. Now let's jump to 70%. I think previously I said 75. These are 70% tax credits. One is a pregnancy resource center. So you donate $1,000, you're going to get $700 back at a tax credit on the Missouri tax return. That is, again, up to $50,000 per year. Some examples of that locally are Birthright Counseling, South County Pregnancy Help Center, Thrive St. Louis, the Lighthouse, Lutheran Families and Children's Services, Midtown Neighborhood Opportunities Corp. I think there's a lot more than these. These are just a handful of ones that either I know of or was able to find, just to give you a list of opportunities. But again, that's just a pregnancy resource center. They do exactly what you would think. They're there for pregnant women to be a resource for them. But this is an area that is very much in need and provides a 70% tax credit, at least in the state of Missouri. Similarly, the fourth category, I shouldn't say similarly, one's similar in terms of the tax credit amounts and functions. So we have the Pregnancy Resource Center, and now we look at domestic violence shelters. So similarly, in terms of you're dealing with women in this case and providing them the help that they need. Same idea where it's 70% tax credit up to $50,000 per year. A couple of examples are Room at the Inn, who we had on this podcast, I believe it was episode 73. So quite a while ago, they were on our podcast when we were talking about some tax credits and charitable donations. So Room at the Inn is one example. Lydia House, the Women's Safe House, Alive Incorporated, all good organizations that will allow you to donate money to help those who are involved in domestic violence or really just need shelter, need to get back on their feet, need a good place to be and to be able to get that help that they need to then move forward safely in life. So that's another area where you can donate, get a 70% tax credit on your tax return for Missouri. Lastly, there is one that provides 100% tax credit, and that is Mo Scholars, M-O Scholars. It is a 100% tax credit. Now, the limit on this is it's limited to 50% of your Missouri tax liability. So in previous examples, we talked about it being able to take it down to zero. Not for this one. This one is limited to half of what you owe for Missouri tax. But it is a 100% tax credit. So if you put in $5,000, you're going to get a $5,000 tax credit. The amount that you get to use on the return is up to half of what you owe Missouri for your taxes. This one's a little bit trickier in terms of the steps needed because you actually have to go to the state's website to reserve the credit. So you have to go to the Most Scholars Tax Credit Reservation Portal that's on the Missouri State Treasurer's website. That's the first step. And then you can go through an organization to make the donation and get the tax credit. But you have to reserve your spot first, then go to the organization. So a couple of them out there are Today and Tomorrow Educational Fund. That focuses on private and parochial schools in St. Louis, Jefferson, St. Genevieve, Warren, and Franklin counties. I'll probably mispronounce the next one, Agudath Israel, mainly serving Orthodox Jewish day schools in St. Louis County. There is ACSI Children's Tuition Fund, which serves an association of Christian schools, international member schools statewide. Another one is Missouri District of Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, supports Lutheran schools in the state. So they're all different options for supporting education that is obviously not public education, but it's for a private education where somebody may not be able to afford to do that. So I've heard of some cases where you might have somebody who is from an area that is a lot lower income and the schools aren't that great, but they're very hardworking, very academically focused, and they're looking for perhaps a private school to go get that additional education that this public school in their area cannot provide. That's a very general understanding and very general statement, but it's a way to provide educational opportunities, and therefore they have these tax credits available to where Missouri will essentially fund it as long as you put up the money and go through all the steps to make the donation. So those are 5 areas where if you're looking for another place to donate, either this year and the following years, assuming these programs are still in place, these are 5 areas where you can look to make a difference in the community and also make a difference on your Missouri tax return in the form of state tax credits. So as you're doing your tax planning, keep those in mind. They're great causes and they need the money, just like every other charities. Don't stop donating where you're donating now because they need the money too. But if you're looking for additional places to donate, these tax credits, especially in Missouri, could be a great option. And other states have very similar programs, which I encourage you to dive into.